make the gloves obviously more comfortable.
Yeah, they suck.
Smaller. Yeah, you don't like them?
Yeah, they suck, dude.
When you try to open your finger, it's a little bit difficult.
Right before UFC 300, the UFC introduced their new official fight gloves, and these gloves had their first real test at UFC 302 in New Jersey. It is safe to say the fighters had a mixed reaction, and it looks like there's a big problem with the new UFC gloves. For fans new to the UFC, gloves might just seem like a standard part of the uniform, kind of like a football player's helmet, but it wasn't always like that. Back at UFC 1, only one fighter wore a glove, the late Art Jimmerson, who decided to compete with one bare hand and one boxing glove in his first and only trip into the octagon. Unsurprisingly, his strategy was ineffective, as you'd expect, with his opponent Royce Gracie taking him down and submitting him in under 3 minutes.
That's amazing. It doesn't take much.
The next guy to try wearing gloves in the octagon was Felix Mitchell at UFC 3. He wore fingerless gloves that looked a lot like the modern mixed martial arts gloves, but he didn't get to fight in them. Referee Big John McCarthy made him take them off before the fight, and it didn't matter much since Ken Shamrock forced him to submit with a rear naked choke in less than 5 minutes. After that, it took 3 more UFC events before anyone wearing gloves won a fight. This time, it was David Tank Abbott, who knew how much damage smashing and avoiding injury, so he asked about wearing gloves at the pre-fight meeting for UFC 6. The other fighters mocked him, but on fight night, those gloves came in handy. He brutalized his first 2 opponents, leaving one out cold and the other a bloody mess with a mix of ground and pound and a 2-minute knee ride on his face. Though Tank came up just short in the final after an 18-minute fight with grappler Oleg Taktarov, he definitely made a name for himself and was the only man to go home with clean knuckles that night. After that, more fighters started wearing gloves. They protected the hands, caused fewer cuts, and let fighters throw more punches. By UFC 14 in 1997, the promotion made it mandatory to wear padded gloves. Other than adding the UFC logo and making some minor tweaks, the gloves stayed mostly the same for over 2 decades. But right before the UFC 300 event, news leaked that the UFC would make a big announcement the day before the biggest card in their history. In a move no one saw coming, the UFC announced a huge overhaul to their gloves.
Gloves are gloves, man. As long as they fit and the leather bends and I can hit somebody with it, that's all that matters.
But if the gloves have been the same for over 2 decades, why is the UFC suddenly changing them? Well, it comes down to safety concerns. The UFC decided to switch gloves to fix safety issues and design flaws in the old ones. Their previous gloves had oversized finger holes that made fighters keep their hands open, which led to more eye pokes, inconsistent stitching caused cuts, and loose wrists added to the safety problems. The biggest issue was that the large finger openings practically forced fighters to keep their hands outstretched, increasing the risk of eye pokes. This became a major issue recently, especially after incidents like Chris Weidman's controversial win over Bruno Silva. During that fight, Weidman accidentally poked Silva in the eye 3 times, which was caught on camera. The final eye poke sent Silva to the mat, and although it was ruled accidental, the referee stopped the fight with only a few minutes left in the final round and went to the scorecards. The decision was controversial, with a lot of backlash from both current and former UFC fighters and MMA fans around the world. Now, these eye pokes really mess up fights. They cause serious injuries to fighters, messing with their vision and ability to keep going. When someone gets poked in the eye, the fight often stops, and it's called a no contest if the hurt fighter can't get back in there. It's all about keeping the match fair and making sure everyone stays safe. Even if someone doesn't mean to poke someone's eye, it can happen during the heat of a fight, like when they're trading punches or grappling. This can mess things up big time, even causing permanent damage to vision. And it's not just the fighters who suffer, fans get disappointed and the whole event loses its momentum. There have been some real standout moments where eye pokes changed the course of a fight. Take Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stephens, for example. Rodriguez accidentally poked Stephens in the eye early on, and Stephens couldn't keep fighting, so it ended in a no contest. Then there's the fight between Leon Edwards and Belal Muhammad in March 2021. Edwards accidentally poked Muhammad in the eye during the second round, and it was so bad Muhammad couldn't keep going. That one ended in a no contest too. And let's not forget Todd Duffy versus Jeff Hughes. The fight had to be called off after Duffy accidentally poked Hughes in the eye. So the UFC has rolled out a fresh glove design to tackle worries about eye pokes and cuts. This new UFC official fight glove came to life with help from athletes, coaches, science, and tech smarts to make sure it fits better, works better, and keeps fighters safer. When it comes to looks, the 3/8 and 5/8 gloves are pretty much twins, no big differences there, and they're good to go for 3 or 5 fight rounds. These new gloves are promising a lot. Fewer facial cuts, no sneaky grabs, and better protection for those delicate hand bones. The UFC says they even figured out how to ditch those annoying glove-induced cuts by shifting all the seams to the palm. And hey, they're not just practical, they're stylish too. Champions get gold gloves while regular fighters and the Ultimate Fighter contestants stick with classic black. The Contender Series athletes rock blue, and there's a cool red version for stuff like Road to UFC. During the big reveal, UFC boss Dana White said, "This redesign is going to shake things up for the MMA. These gloves feel lighter, fit like a dream, keep fighters safe, and give them the freedom to move in the ring. You'll be seeing these bad boys in action this summer." Despite all the promises and hype, the real test for the new gloves came during the build-up to UFC 302 and the championship main event between Islam Makhachev and Dustin Poirier. While the two lightweights sported the new gold gloves reserved for title bouts, others like Sean Strickland and Paulo Costa stuck with the standard black gloves UFC fans know well, and the reactions from fighters afterwards should have the UFC feeling a bit worried. During the pre- and post-fight news conference, several fighters shared their thoughts on the gloves. Lightweight title contender Dustin Poirier found them more comfortable and easier to make a fist with, though he worried that the less dense padding might lead to more cuts. Still, he gave him a thumbs up. On the other hand, lightweight champion Islam Makhachev wasn't too pleased, criticizing the gloves' maneuverability and finding them harder and more restrictive, especially when trying to open his fingers.
I landed a lot of good punches, honestly. The first punches I almost knocked him down. If I believe more, I think I can knock him out today, but...
Former UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland, known for his blunt style both in and out of the ring, also didn't hold back his criticism of the new gloves.
Yeah, those gloves fucking suck, but yeah, no, they're fine. They're fine. I don't really know the purpose of them, but yeah, they're fine.
It wasn't just the fighters' opinions that raised concerns. Despite hopes that the new gloves would reduce the frequency of eye pokes, those hopes were quickly dashed during the very first fight of the night. Andre Lima and Mitch Raposo both suffered 3 eye pokes each despite using the new gloves. By the end of the event, multiple fighters had ended up with fingers in their eyes and had problems with the new gloves. One thing that stands out about these new gloves, according to the fighters who've used them in the octagon, is that they make it easier to form a fist. Some fighters mentioned feeling less grip and forearm fatigue, which is a relief when you're up against the rigidity of the glove. Others even found it easier to grab opponents during grappling scenarios. So it's all good stuff, right? But when it comes to the delicate subject of eye safety, it seems the new gloves aren't living up to expectations. And that's a big deal, not just because it's risky for fighters to be accidentally poking each other in the eyes, but also because it could really mess with the outcomes of fights. Now it's still too early, and the number of fights is too small to draw firm conclusions. That's not to say the new UFC gloves are terrible, but it seems like they missed the mark on the big issue everyone was hoping they'd solve, and instead focused on smaller problems. So what's your take on the new gloves? Do you think the UFC hit the mark or missed it this time? And hey, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more UFC content.